want to welcome to our Congressional Western Caucus forum. It's titled "The Golden State of Nuclear Power: The Importance of Diablo Canyon and Nuclear Energy in the State of California and Our Grid." Today, I'm joined by my friends and fellow representatives from the great state of California, Doug LaMalfa and David Valadao. Welcome to you both. I'm glad to have you both here today. I want to thank our witnesses for carving out time out of their busy schedules to be here with us to highlight the need for continued development of clean energy infrastructure. This week, during the National Clean Energy Week, the Congressional Western Caucus is taking time to highlight different energy technologies and how the strategy of all the above energy policy is beneficial for everyone, from the generators to the utilities to the consumers who rely on that power when they flip their light switch on in the morning. Today, we're talking about California's energy grid, nuclear-powered, Diablo Canyon specifically, and how all those three things intersect and impact our constituents back home. This forum could not be more timely. Much of California spent last week struggling to maintain a stable electricity supplies during the heat wave. On Tuesday of last week, peak electricity demand reached 52,061 megawatts, nearly exceeding total available supplies and shattering the 2006 record. Even without the state ordering rolling blackouts, as many as 37,000 Californians were without their power across the state on Tuesday. Unreliable power during extreme heat is unfortunately becoming the new normal in California. As the chairman likely knows well, the California Independent System Operator, which manages the state's grid, brought nearly 65,000 megawatt hours of hydroelectricity from the Bonneville Power Administration over a 5-day period in August of 2020. This was again in response to the unreliability of California's electricity supplies during extreme heat. According to Cal ISO's president at the time, the difference between 2006 and 2020 heat waves was that, and I quote this, there was a lot more generating capacity in 2006 than in 2020. We had San Onofre and a number of other plants totaling thousands of megawatts that are not here today, end quote. If it weren't for the reliance on hydroelectric system in the Pacific Northwest, it's hard to say how many of our constituents would have faced during the 2020 heat wave. Let's look at some facts. Energy prices in California have increased 1.7 times the national average, and residential energy prices have increased 2.7 times the national average. Among the lower 48 states, California has the highest average retail price of electricity for residential sector. California is the largest net importer of electricity of any state in the country. Last year, California imported 30% of its total system electric generation. California's summer electric generation capacity increased by about 10,700 megawatts between 2010 and 2020. However, gas power capacity during that same time span declined by 4,390 megawatts and nuclear by 2,150 megawatts. Obviously, California lost roughly 2,200 megawatts when it shut down San Onofre nuclear generation station in 2013. We cannot control the temperature, but we can implement policies that promote a secure and reliant electric grid. California's leadership has consistently shown its preference for decreased reliability and increased costs to its citizens. America is the wealthiest nation on the planet, and there is no reason that the lights shouldn't turn on every time we flip the switch. Turning to Diablo Canyon, this is the last operating nuclear power plant in California, has a capacity of roughly 2,300 megawatts, provides power for nearly 3 million Californians annually, makes up nearly 10% of the entire state's electricity. And until just a few weeks ago, the state government in Sacramento was insistent on shutting down the facility. This would have been devastating to California, and we've been fighting to protect this critical resource. I'm leading the Clean Energy Protection Act, included in language in the House Energy and Water Appropriation Bill, to push the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to explore federal avenues to secure this carbon-free source of baseload power for California residents. Fortunately, the fever broke briefly in Sacramento, and the state legislature has acted to keep Diablo Canyon open for at least 5 more years. While I appreciate this overdue action, this is a crisis that we made. And I believe it highlights what's at stake when politicians, not energy markets, decide how to power American homes. This is uncharted territory. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and I look forward to working with Chairman Newhouse, my California colleagues, and the Western Caucus to ensure the regulatory process proceeds smoothly. To this end, I believe there's a number of unanswered questions on the short-term and long-term future of Diablo Canyon. I appreciate PG&E's Vice President of Decommissioning and Technical Services, Mrs. Maureen Zawalick, I'll get that correct, and join us to highlight the processes at play. The timeless regulators need to meet to keep Diablo Canyon open and see what we can do to help. I'm also glad to have Michael Schellenberger from the Environmental Progress, Chris Barnard from the American Conservation Coalition to discuss the valuable role that our civilian nuclear fleet plays in providing stable energy and helping meet emission targets. I look forward to our witness today and a productive Q&A. And I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Vice President of Decommissioning and Technical Services at PG&E, Ms. Maureen Zawalick. And Mrs. Zawalick, I'll turn it over for you for your opening statement. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Congressman Calvert. I really appreciate the opportunity to join today's discussion on the importance of nuclear energy in California's clean energy future. I'm Maureen Zawalick, as you mentioned, Vice President of Decommissioning and Technical Services. That also includes the license renewal process, as we have that decision from a couple weeks ago with the state legislation and the governor's office. I joined PG&E in 1997 and have over 33 years of experience in the utility and nuclear energy industry. PG&E owns and operates California's only active nuclear power plant, as you mentioned, Diablo Canyon Power Plant, which provides safe, reliable, low-cost power to more than 3 million people. The carbon-free electricity generated by Diablo Canyon plays a key role in allowing PG&E to deliver some of the cleanest energy in the nation. As you well know, California Governor Newsom recently signed the Senate Bill 846, which seeks to continue to operate Diablo Canyon for an additional 5 years beyond 2025. The California legislature and Governor Newsom took the significant action to ensure statewide energy reliability and to minimize greenhouse gas emissions as the state transitions to additional clean energy resources. Following this change in state policy, PG&E is ready to support the state's electric reliability needs and serve our customers. The legislation directs the state to authorize a loan up to $1.4 billion to PG&E to support extending plant operations. It further directs us to seek funding from the Department of Energy and any other potentially available federal funding, which would be used to pay back the loan and reduce costs for our customers. Earlier this month, on September 2nd, PG&E applied for the federal funding through the DOE's Civil Nuclear Credit Program, which was included in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The legislation also directs all relevant state agencies and PG&E to act quickly and coordinate on the necessary and prudent actions to extend plant operations. Extending operations requires a number of necessary federal, state, and regulatory approvals, including relicensing at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. To that effect, I'd like to thank you, Congressman Calvert, for including in the language the House Energy and Water Appropriations Bill that would direct the NRC to develop a plan to continue operations at Diablo Canyon. That's very critical. There are also some critical near-term activities we are undertaking to make this a viable option, including funding for fuel procurement and purchasing, spent fuel management, and new casks that we would need as a pre-shutdown activity, and ramping up the project team to support the NRC's license renewal application. As always, our commitment and focus are on safe and reliable operations at Diablo Canyon. Myself, my family, and workers at Diablo Canyon live in the communities surrounding the plant, and we are dedicated to its safe operations. The NRC's assessment of the plant most recently concluded, and has for years, that the overall performance preserves the public health and safety, and the assessment places the plant among the top performing facilities in the country. Diablo Canyon is continually inspected and assessed by the NRC inspectors to ensure its safe operations. There are 2 resident inspectors that are there at the site inspecting us every day on everything that we do. Regarding seismic safety, it's important to note that earthquake safety was at the forefront in the design of the facility. The NRC has deemed Diablo Canyon seismically safe. If it was not, the NRC would not allow us to operate. We maintain a long-term seismic program that is comprised of a geosciences team of professionals who partner with independent seismic experts on an ongoing basis. We do that every day. It's been required by our license to operate since the late 80s. And this team evaluates regional geology and global seismic and tsunami events to ensure the facility remains safe every day. Because of this program and decades of industry-leading research, the seismic region around Diablo Canyon is among the most studied and understood areas in the nation. As PG&E follows the state's directive to pursue extending operation, our co-workers at Diablo Canyon will continue to focus on operating the plant to the highest level of safety and excellence. Throughout this process, we will also engage with relevant stakeholders, including members of Congress, as we understand many of you and your constituents are interested in what the potential extension of operating Diablo Canyon could mean for them. I really appreciate, again, this opportunity to speak with you today. And I also am happy to invite you and host you to Diablo Canyon and members of your staff to come on a tour and to visit the site. And with that, I look forward to your questions.
Okay, got it. Thank you. And next, we're going to be joined by Michael Schellenberger. Mr. Schellenberger is the founder and president of a group in California called Environmental Progress. Mr. Schellenberger, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, sir. And it's a great pleasure for me to address all of you. And it was one of my happiest moments when the California legislature and Governor Newsom decided to save Diablo Canyon. When I was a boy in my teenage years, my sister told me that they had built a nuclear plant in California on an earthquake fault. And the picture that came into my mind was a mushroom cloud. I was raised under the fear of nuclear power like many Gen Xers. Chernobyl happened when I was 14. Diablo Canyon came online when I was 13, around the time when my sister and I were becoming very progressive politically. I only started to change my mind about nuclear power when we discovered the large impacts of renewables on land use, particularly on the desert tortoise in California and the Mojave, where desert tortoises are being killed to build solar farms, and also the impact of wind turbines on the North Atlantic right whale, which could go extinct if a wind farm is built off the coast of Cape Cod. I went to visit Diablo Canyon in 2015 because PG&E wanted my help as an environmentalist to make the case for saving the plant. A few months afterwards, I had heard that PG&E was under pressure from Governor Newsom to shut it down. I went down to San Luis Obispo, held a meeting, and told the workers what I had heard, that they were going to shut the plant down. When the announcement came in 2016 that PG&E was going to shut the plant down, I was the only person, literally, along with a few workers at the plant, to oppose the decision. Not only did PG&E support the decision, but so did the Nuclear Energy Institute, which supposedly represents nuclear power in the United States. I also discovered that the government in California had manipulated studies showing some sort of environmental impact on marine life from the slightly warm water coming from the plant. It's bogus, I discovered, because there were scientists that found that, in fact, because they don't allow school children to tromp around on the sea anemones and on the beautiful intertidal basin, Diablo has some of the most pristine reef of any part of Central California. It was pushed by Gavin Newsom as a reward to Friends of the Earth and others as a way to establish his progressive credentials in California. When I was there, I was blown away by the wildlife at the plant. There are sea lions and seals that hang out at the discharge point of the plant where the slightly warmer water leaves the ocean. When I visited again recently last fall, we saw humpback whales breaching near the plant. It's spectacular. It's everything an environmentalist should want from a power plant. All of the waste is stored at the site of production, never hurts anybody, never could hurt anybody. It's one of the best operated plants in the world because, as Maureen just said, they live there. They go to work pregnant with their babies. These are people that love this plant, and that's the key to nuclear safety is the people. It's not about the machines like Bill Gates says. It's about the people who work there and caring about it. So I'm very honored to have been involved in saving the plant. I would like to take Maureen up on your offer to visit the plant, and I would like to give an award to the workers. I'd like to give the Environmental Progress Courage Award to the workers for keeping the faith, even when everybody was attacking the plant and lying about the plant and claiming the plant was dangerous when it was not, when it's in fact preventing pollution, preventing air pollution deaths. Mr. Calvert, you made an important point about California. Its record is not what people think. The share of zero carbon power on California's electrical grid declined 10% over the last decade. We worry about environmental justice in rhetoric in California, but we've been burning kerosene and diesel in poor communities of color in California in order to avoid blackouts. If they had not had Diablo Canyon online, there would have been rolling blackouts. Governor Newsom himself admits that. I do not think PG&E should ever shut down Diablo Canyon. And if PG&E wants to get rid of Diablo Canyon for some irrational reason, I believe they should have a chance to sell the plant to somebody who cares about nuclear power. Diablo Canyon was built with space for 6 reactors. We discovered the original blueprints, and there is room for 6 reactors on site. Why? So they can desalinate water, which is California's moral obligation to the West, which is suffering from droughts. It can also produce hydrogen. Currently, the plant produces a small amount of desalinated water for San Luis Obispo, but it could produce significant quantities. If you have 6 full-size reactors, the same size of the reactors there, it would produce enough power for 21% of California. It produces enough power right now for 9%. Wait, is my math wrong? 28%, sorry. You'd have enough power for 28% of California as opposed to just 9%. So this is a no-brainer to expand the plant. There's every single component in the nuclear plants can be replaced. So nuclear plants are functionally immortal. And we've built a pro-nuclear movement around the world that is fighting for nuclear plants everywhere. Belgium, Germany, Illinois, New York, South Korea, and Japan are now returning to nuclear. What's happening in California really matters. I'm really grateful for a chance to speak with the Western Caucus. It's extremely important that you all have decided to highlight this jewel, I think the crown jewel of America's nuclear power plants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schellenberger. Our final witness today comes to us from the American Conservation Coalition, otherwise known as the ACC, Mr. Chris Barnard. He is the policy director for the ACC. Mr. Barnard, you are recognized.
Good afternoon. I want to start by thanking Chairman Newhouse and Representative Calvert for organizing today's forum, as well as Representatives Valadao and LaMalfa of the Western Caucus for being here. As you said, my name is Chris Barnard. I am the National Policy Director for the American Conservation Coalition, the nation's largest conservative grassroots environmental organization. My work focuses on analyzing and promoting policies that can help us protect our environment while creating a strong economy. Earlier this week, I was visiting my parents who live in the United Kingdom. I noticed they were drying their clothes outside and were wearing sweaters inside at night instead of turning on the central heating. I asked them why. They said their energy bill had doubled in the last few months. Since the year 2000, the UK has shut down 11 nuclear power plants. The story is the same across Europe. From Germany to Belgium to Switzerland, country after country has turned against nuclear energy. Here in the United States, we too have been heading in the wrong direction. Of the 55 plants in operation in the US, around a quarter are at risk of early retirement, while 12 reactors have already been closed since 2012. The organization I work for, ACC, represents thousands of young conservatives across the country who care about the environment, but are also pro-America and believe in common sense. They are deeply worried about the effects of bad energy policy, not just on the future planet they will inherit, but also their economic prospects and American security. Fortunately, it appears the tide is changing. About 2 months ago, I published an article in the Wall Street Journal titled "The Global Nuclear Power Comeback." The article started by pointing out that California Senator Dianne Feinstein, a longtime critic of nuclear energy, was urging her state to keep the nuclear plant at Diablo Canyon online. 2 weeks ago, California announced that it would revert its decision to prematurely close Diablo Canyon. This is a reflection of what Californians want. 58% of voters in the state support nuclear energy in a recent poll, and in the county where Diablo Canyon is located, the number jumps to 74%. As Michael said, this shows the power of community activism and common sense. Grassroots movements in California and across the world have been instrumental in changing the tide of public opinion on nuclear energy. ACC members have written dozens of op-eds, organized events across the West, and pushed their members of Congress to support nuclear power. We have come to a point where being anti-nuclear energy is simply no longer an option. But we shouldn't regard nuclear power as a mere necessary evil to get us through the winter. In fact, I believe that nuclear power is the best energy source to meet three key challenges: economic prosperity, national security, and environmental protection. It's no secret that California has some of the most ambitious climate goals in the world. What is less clear is how the state intends to meet these goals. Mere days after banning the sale of new gas cars after 2035, the state asked residents to stop charging their electric cars. Apparently, California's electric grid is incapable of supplying enough electricity to charge EVs when they make up just 12% of all cars in the state, let alone 100%. As the state seeks to meet its climate goals without making rolling blackouts the norm, it is clear that reliable, baseload nuclear power must be a part of the solution. There are also economic benefits. Nuclear energy can operate 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, producing cheap electricity. California's economy is enormous, as you all know, and an important part of US economic growth. If it were a country, the state would be the 5th largest economy in the world. To sustain this growth into the future, it will require the reliability and affordability of nuclear power. Finally, the war in Ukraine has highlighted the importance of energy security. We cannot rely on our adversaries for our energy needs. Producing reliable domestic energy is a matter of national security. Relying solely on weather-dependent renewable sources of energy, such as wind and solar, will weaken California's grid. Nuclear power, however, can provide the state with reliable, abundant, clean energy to keep the lights on. Countries around the world are embracing nuclear power once again because it is the only energy source capable of meeting environmental, economic, and national security goals all at once. I am encouraged that California had a similar realization with regards to Diablo Canyon. Young people understand this. As a young person myself, I applaud it. The next generation are increasingly pro-nuclear energy because they are pro their future. Thank you to the members of the Western Caucus for helping fight for that.
Thank you, Mr. Barnard. We'll now move on to questions. I'll yield to my good friend and Vice Chairman of the Western Caucus, Mr. Doug LaMalfa. Doug, take it away.
Ken, thank you very much for hosting this today. This is a great topic and very timely. As we see how stretched our power grid here is in California, and the insanity of relying so much on power that's not available 24/7. And so I was cheering the work being done on the Diablo Canyon plant, and I really appreciate the comments today, especially by Mr. Schellenberger on that, with what a cornerstone that needs to be going into the future, whether PG&E operates it or somebody else. And I'll give a golf clap to the state legislature. I think 5 years shows that they probably aren't really serious about it. They're buying time because somebody did some math down there on the available power that we're going to have short term here, and shutting off those 2 reactors in 24 and 25 is not going to be made up by more windmills or solar panels, especially since, it was brought up that when you start doing solar panels and putting out that array, someone else tries to stop you because it's going to disturb the desert tortoise or something. So that, and the fact that I think the figure was around 70,000 acres of solar panels it would take to replace Diablo Canyon. So although they're underway trying to do that to ag land in the San Joaquin Valley, since they've taken the water away from that, we're gonna be in real fix here. But when you look at the other areas where our electricity grid's being attacked, in the north end of my district, hydroelectric power is being attacked on the Klamath River system there, where we have 4 dams that produce enough CO2 free power for about 75,000 homes. And they're going to use the water bond money on the California side to take them out and release probably 20 million cubic yards of silt into the Klamath River. They've glossed over that. We need some help in convincing FERC that this is going to be a bad deal. But we're focused on this nuclear plant today, and I personally am rejoicing that it's going to get an extension, and I hope that extension leads to another one, because a 5-year plan, though it buys time, and I'm happy for it, doesn't really show that I think that they're serious about keeping it around to its useful life, as I think is 2040 or 2045, somewhere in there. And so, and we need more of this. So when we look at the needs for baseline power, base load power, nuclear power, hydro, biomass, where you have a known fuel source, such as all this forest product that we have that needs to be brought from the forest by people to a dedicated plant. These are the kinds of things that are going to keep the lights on for us. And I think our friends in Germany are learning that lesson very, very vividly, that when you rely on a source, in this case, Russian natural gas, and at the same time, they're shutting down their nuclear plants. They're phasing them out to the point where I think they're about 25%. Maybe that was their peak. They're down to about 13, and they're slated to do it in the next couple of years. France was at least 50, but they're on the path to shutting a bunch of theirs down. And I hope they're learning a lesson from this energy situation they're going to go through this year, where they're actually turning to firewood to stay warm in Germany this year. So how medieval can you get? So I think what I'm going to focus on question-wise real quickly here is that one of the things you hear about is, and I'd like to direct this, Mr. Schellenberger, the issue with the waste, the byproduct from a nuclear plant. It's being stored in, I believe, in casks in water-filled pools there. And I'd also like to go on the tour of that plant someday too, as was offered a minute ago. But there's a lot of ways, it seems, to better utilize the so-called waste. I've been trying to get a little more educated on this with some seminars we've had in DC on this lately. And the byproducts can be turned into something else. So why is there such giant hesitancy to actually convert these so-called spent rods into something else? It seems they can be re-energized, they can be redirected. I know there's some issue about the plutonium as a byproduct of this. And I think back in the Carter era, it was deemed that making the plutonium conversion is somehow going to have more proliferation of nuclear weapons. Could you touch on that, please, Mr. Schellenberger, on what's the reality on taking nuclear waste and making it into other things, or just re-energizing it, directing right back into making more power? Somebody was talking about breeder reactors, and that's a different process. So can you enlighten us a little bit on that?
Sure. Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. And this is something that I'll be addressing in my forthcoming book called The War on Nuclear, Why It Hurts Us All. The original vision, of course, with nuclear was that you would have a generation of light water plants like the kind of Diablo Canyon that would have what's called a once through fuel cycle. The fuel comes out of the plant, it sits in pools of water to cool for I think 2 or 3 years. Maureen can correct me if I'm wrong. They then go into something called dry cask storage into steel and concrete canisters at the site of production. As an environmentalist, that's everything you want from environmental waste management. When waste goes into the natural environment, it becomes pollution. Or solar panels, for example, we have no solution to them. They were probably going to go to landfills, as the Los Angeles Times reports, where they instantly become hazardous waste, and yet we don't have proper hazardous waste treatment for those solar panels. The state has been in an ongoing regulatory procedure to figure out what to do with those solar panels, and there is no solution because trying to manage them in the same high quality standards that we manage so-called nuclear waste would make solar panels prohibitively expensive. But
And
nonetheless,
Michael, there's the hysterical shipping of windmill blades 150 feet long, I think, to a dump in Utah. I mean, it's crazy, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
that's right, sir. The wind and solar waste byproducts epitomize the problems with solar because solar is a energy dilute fuel, so to speak, in the form of sunlight and wind, which thus requires significantly more land, 300 to 400 times more land, and significantly more material intensity, 3 to 10 times more copper, rare earths, and other materials. So then to your question, sir, the vision originally under Eisenhower and the United States government was to then reprocess the used fuel in the way that France currently does, and it becomes fuel that can then be reused over and over again. You're then left with an extremely tiny quantity of waste byproduct that can then be vitrified and stored underground, as France does. It's an incredibly efficient process. The anti-nuclear advocates, starting in the 60s, led by Ralph Nader, the Union of Concerned Scientists and Mothers Against Nuclear, along with other groups, they played to fears of weapons, like the kind that I had growing up, to point out that plutonium is produced in that nuclear fuel cycle. But this is absurd because plutonium is produced in today's, when today's nuclear plants are operating. And so you just don't, it's in the part of the process of transmutation. You just let the process keep going, and then it turns into waste byproduct. So what they've done is they've basically fearmongered to scare people about nuclear power for the last 75 years because they don't want cheap and abundant power. That was the main reason they were against nuclear. It was not because of the waste. It was not because of accidents. It was because the Malthusian pro-scarcity anti-human activists within the Sierra Club, led by David Brower, in alliance with Friends of the Earth and Mothers Against Nuclear, went and preyed on people's natural and understandable fears of radiation, which they didn't understand, to kill off the nuclear fuel cycle and to create a problem around where that doesn't exist. So in my view, sir, the right solution is that the used fuel, which will be used for future nuclear plants, be kept at the site of production and not moved. There was never any need for moving the waste, in my view. And then in the future, let's say 2100, when PG&E builds one of Bill Gates's new power plants at that same site, it can then reuse those used fuel byproducts as fuel for future plants.
Michael, talk for a moment. I was at a seminar the other night about this and related, in that the nuclear electricity production also produces the ability to harvest isotopes that are used in health treatment and some instruments and things like that, such as, cobalt 59 becomes cobalt 60, and that's very useful for a lot of things. The ability to make small nuclear, I'm going to use the terminology wrong, but basically they're making small bits of this material that uses seeds that can be used to treat prostate cancer and other forms of cancer in health and such. And that's not even talked about hardly. And we're going to have a dramatic shortage because guess what we're relying on? We're relying on China and Russia to send us this stuff. And we have the ability as a byproduct in our nuclear plants to make this. And you talked about the plutonium. Isn't there other ways to reconfigure plants to basically burn plutonium to make power too?
If you can briefly answer that, then we can move on to.
Yeah. Thank you, Ken.
Yes, sir. I'll just say very briefly that, yes, you are correct that so much of what we know about the body is thanks to using nuclear energy waste byproducts in the form of isotopes, medical isotopes, to be able to trace bodily processes. And then you're absolutely right. We use then those waste byproducts as forms of medicine to treat various things, including, as you mentioned, cancers, and for other purposes. So yes, it's really quite a miraculous scientific process. And yes, there is a way to reuse those waste byproducts, from basically plutonium is a moment in the fuel cycle, safely managed. It doesn't pose any problems whatsoever. And in fact, is a net benefit to reusing those nuclear materials.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Schellenberger. And next, we're going to move on to Mr. Valadao for his questions. David.
Yeah, thanks, Calvert. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you to all our guests for the information you provided today. But the one thing I felt like it wasn't clearly addressed was, what are we doing wrong to get the public support for this? I've watched, that old documentary, Pandora's Promise. It sounds like Mr. Schellenberger's writing a book. I've toured that facility myself probably 2-3 times in the last 10-15 years. And I was blown away by the amount of security, the amount of redundant systems in place to make sure that it was safe and operates. And but I just don't understand why we can't get the public support. The amount of information just on the solar, and we put in a megawatt of solar on our farm, and we always get a lot of compliments on the fact that we're doing something great. But then you're starting to see these stories pop up about the future of solar and the impacts. But nuclear, we can't seem to get any real traction with the public. What are we missing?
Mr. Barnard, you'd like to comment on that?
Sure. Thank you, Representative Valadao. I think there have been shifting opinions in the right direction to the extent that even in Germany right now, the majority of the German public do support keeping their nuclear plants online. Most of that is just simply because of the situation that is at hand with the energy crisis. People are kind of being forced into understanding that they can't do without nuclear. But I do think that for a very long time, like Michael talked about, the kind of progressive environmental movement have completely monopolized the debate on nuclear and just weaponized it to fearmonger. And so one of the things that we work on at ACC is educating young people on like the real benefits of nuclear energy, and trying to kind of push back against some of the fear mongering. One of the interesting things that we found very successful is that sometimes nuclear advocates can be on the defensive. They say, well, no, actually it's not that bad. Like, actually there's not that much waste, or actually it's not that bad for the environment. It's actually like pretty good. What we have tried to do is go more on the offensive, say like, no, the only way we can tackle climate change is if we have nuclear. The only way we can balance economic growth with environmental protection is by having nuclear. We need to have a much more forward-looking message of optimism that includes nuclear as really one of the central solutions there. And we've seen a lot of good responses to that. And like I mentioned, the polling in your district is really starting to shift pro-nuclear, because they understand the benefits not just to the energy grid, to climate change, but also to your local economy. So those are the kinds of messages that we need to keep pushing out and pushing back against the groups that Michael mentioned.
You still have a little time left, David. You have another question?
Oh, no, I just didn't know if Michael wanted to throw something in there on that one.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I would say the most important thing has been to build a movement of citizens independent of the nuclear industry. The nuclear industry, in particular, including PG&E, I'm sad to say, suffers from a kind of battered wife syndrome, where they have been so attacked and so abused. I had nuclear engineers tell me that they were called baby killers. These are men and women who have given their lives in service of one of the greatest scientific achievements of humankind, which is harnessing the power of the atom to create medicines, zero carbon electricity, zero pollution electricity, the cleanest and most environmentally sound form of electricity, and also our greatest source of national security. And they've been demonized by people who have been led to believe that nuclear is a kind of demonic force. There's no other way to describe why you would shut down a source of power so important, so reliable to national security why Germany would move forward to do this in the midst of the worst energy crisis in its history, the only way you can explain it is as what sociologists call a moral panic, meaning that people sort of opportunistically made themselves afraid of this in order to fearmonger to others, to feel a sense of sort of social importance, psychological importance, even spiritual power, to exercise that power over society, including over powerful institutions like PG&E. And so the people involved in this technology, they did not know what would hit them. They in the 50s, you have to remember that when Eisenhower created the Atomic Energy Commission, when he inherited it rather, and they were deciding how to run it, they were talking about nuclear was like considered the most important technology in the United States. It was sort of considered the greatest honor to be part of the nuclear industry. Well, by the time you get through the 1970s, people were embarrassed to be associated with nuclear power. It was not a prestige occupation. And so it's really taken a citizens movement. It's also taken the workers at the plant, particularly Mothers for Nuclear, who have been pregnant while working at the plant, thereby debunking the crazy myths that exist around radiation. It's been really their advocacy that has made the difference. So I think that it's also to policymakers like you, sir, who speak out for the plant, who visit the plant, who take selfies at the plant, who photograph the sea lions and the seals, and who meet the workers. And it's important to tell the workers, like we're going to do when we give them the Courage Award, that they matter, that their lives have meaning and purpose by providing this incredible service of clean electricity, reliable electricity for the people of California.
Thank you, Mr. Schellenberger.
If I could I just add on there?
Yes, go ahead.
So you've mentioned a couple times, Michael, about pregnant workers out there. I've had two daughters that I was a pregnant worker out there, so maybe you're talking about myself. But what I'd like to also add to this is, PG&E is extremely proud, the leadership team, even back in 2016, and for the history of Diablo Canyon, very proud of the workers and the safe and excellent performance, safe and reliable, excellent performance at Diablo Canyon. Without being a top performer in the United States, we wouldn't be here. We've been ready for that call to come to turn this decision around and to continue to operate. And I just want to add, per a recent MIT Stanford study, if we extend operations of Diablo Canyon, we reduce California's carbon emissions by an average of 7 million metric tons of carbon dioxide annually. And that is quite a feat. And because we're such a top performer, we can continue to operate and pursue the license renewals of Diablo Canyon.
Matter of fact, Mrs. Zawalick, that's exactly what I was going to get into. And obviously, we're reversing the course of decommissioning. I expect this is going to create some regulatory challenges in itself. Of course, the federal government is not known for moving at rapid speed. So we need to get on this right away. What are some of the biggest regulatory hurdles you think that we as Western Caucus members need to be aware of for the industry and for Diablo specifically? And because what happens after 5 years? What do we need to do in between to get this decommissioning process going, and making sure that we work with our colleagues in the state legislature to keep the plant open, not just for the short term, I think, and I agree with Mr. Schellenberger, but for the long term.
No, I appreciate that question. A couple of things I would add that would be helpful is the NRC does not have a clear path with Diablo Canyon on the relicensing. What I mean by that is we were about 80 to 90% complete with the license renewal process in 2016 when we had to withdraw it because of the joint proposal. And so we've been talking with the NRC, in fact, have meetings with them next week about reinstating that. There's no plant in the United States has reinstated their license renewal application. So any support on authorizing or supporting the commission of having that previous application reinstated would be helpful and be appreciated. Previously, what the NRC looks at is your application is timely and sufficient, and ours was. And we have a strong case to continue to demonstrate that. But again, there's no clear path on our situation right now of having withdrawn it now, excuse me, reinstated. On a state level, with the Senate bill, we have in the language, it describes a new process through the Secretary of Natural Resources with several of the agencies like the State Lands Commission, the Water Board, and the California Coastal Commission to work together to make sure that our permits or our previous exemptions are extended. And so that's very necessary to have both that federal pathway and that state pathway to continue operations at Diablo Canyon.
Yeah, any help you need, I'm sure both David and Doug and myself and all our Western colleagues will work with you if we need any language, federal language, which would be helpful. I don't know if they're going to force you in some kind of a new environmental review process. I hope not. Maybe you can comment on that. I would think that sufficient studies have already been done, and so if we need to get some language in an appropriation bill or something that would be helpful, you should work with us and let us know. But is there going to be any additional environmental review required on this?
Yes, in our initial meetings with the NRC, and again, we'll have some more next week, the previous National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA, because it's over 5 years old, we now need to start that over. And so we can have some more follow-up conversations with you because that opens up various proceedings and contentions, if you will, that we'll have to go through as part of the license renewal application on the federal level. On the state level, that's to be determined through that new process that I mentioned that the Secretary of Natural Resources, Wade Crowfoot, will be leading.
Are they going to require that review to take place prior to your application being accepted?
No, how it works is by end of next year, third quarter or so next year, we will submit our license renewal application again based on they're talking with Office of General Counsel based on if it's a reinstatement, starting over, or if it's a phased approach. So we'll submit that, and what the NRC needs to do is deem it timely and sufficient, and then we can continue to operate even past 2024 and 2025 when the current licenses are to expire. There's precedence in the industry where that's happened at another nuclear station. So their reviews will continue as we transition into continued or extended operations period.
Okay, yeah, I would think there would be some sort of emergency declaration on that, because if your plant isn't operating, California would be in a difficult situation. Doug, David, any other follow-up questions before we adjourn our meeting? Yeah, Doug, your sound's got to come back on.
Oh, there you go. Thank you. I thought I'd turn it on. All right. Yeah, I'll follow up on that. Whether they have to go through a new NEPA again, because it's not within the last 5 years, we need to be ready to, however we consist, as you mentioned, whether it's tucked into another bill. I can't imagine that it would be wise to force them to shut down the reactors because the timing isn't right for this permitting. And I'm sure they wouldn't, because you don't just spool up and down a nuclear plant. But can she comment about the 1-year extensions while you're waiting for permits, so there is no slow up in procuring what you need to operate or continue to operate? Is there precedent for continuing short-term permits to keep operating?
Are you talking about on a state level?
Whatever it takes, Maureen.
Yeah. So right now, we are
federal level. Probably federal.
Yeah, on the federal level, again, we'll be working with the NRC on the license renewal application. We'll be submitting that next year. And then we'll be waiting for them to deem it timely and sufficient so we can continue to operate. They don't have a clear, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission does not have a clear path, as I mentioned there. So support in that effort would be appreciated. There is nothing currently that we need extended on like a one-year basis. We have everything to operate to 2024 and 2025. So in this transition phase, that's when we need to be working on the license renewal application and the efforts needed on aging management program and things like that.
Well, 2
And
years
so-
is gonna move, as Doug's probably pointed out, 2 years is gonna move very, very quickly. So anything we need to do as fast as possible, they'll do, because as you know, once you reopen a NEPA process, you also reopen the opportunity for lawsuits. And, lawyers tend to screw things up. So we want to make sure that we keep this process moving. And speaking of process moving, I know we were going to keep this to an hour. And I want to thank Doug, and I think David is already off the line. I don't see him anyway. And I want to thank them both for joining us, and I want to thank our witnesses. I appreciate you all coming on very much. I think it's clear that we've got to keep Diablo open, and I think that we need to work toward additional nuclear power throughout the United States to meet the challenges that are ahead of us. And we know, we all want to keep the lights on without having to borrow money to pay every month's electric bill. And we see what's going on in Europe, especially in England right now, as pointed out. These electric bills, tripled in price. I mean, people can't afford to heat their homes or cool their homes. And so as we have a responsibility as members of Congress, certainly as Western Caucus, to ensure everybody has affordable energy and a stable energy supply. We are a first world nation. We want to keep it that way. And so, and especially California. So I want to thank everybody for participating today and celebrating our National Clean Energy Week. And we certainly look forward to working with all of you in the future. And so we'll stay in touch. And with that, we're adjourned.